The dust devils danced across the main street of Clearwater, a town that had seen better days even when it was new. The year was 1882, and the boomtown dreams had long since dried up like the creek that gave the place its misleading name. What remained was a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the vast indifference of the Wyoming Territory, their false fronts trying to maintain some dignity against the relentless prairie wind. Samuel Hawthorne pulled his worn cavalry hat lower against the late afternoon sun and guided his horse toward the town's edge. The animal was as tired as he was, both of them bearing the dust of too many miles and too few destinations. Sam's eyes, once sharp enough to spot Apache raiders in the desert's shimmer, now held the dull wariness of a man who'd seen too much and slept too little. The war had been over for 17 years, but some battles never truly ended. He'd drifted west after Appomattox, unable to return to the Virginia farm that no longer existed, to the family that lay beneath simple wooden crosses. The cavalry had taught him to ride, to shoot, to survive. But it hadn't taught him how to live with the ghosts that followed him from battlefield to battlefield. So he kept moving, one town blending into another, one day indistinguishable from the next. Clearwater was just another stop, another place to earn a few dollars before the restlessness drove him onward. Sam tied his horse to the hitching post outside Murphy's General Store and stepped onto the creaking boardwalk. His spurs rang hollow against the wood, a lonely sound that seemed to emphasize the town's emptiness. "Help you?" The storekeeper, a thin man with suspicious eyes, barely looked up from his ledger. "Looking for work," Sam said, his voice rough from disuse. "Anything that pays honest wages?" Murphy snorted. "Ain't much call for drifters here. Try the Rocking J Ranch, 10 miles north. They might need hands for the fall drive." He paused, taking in Sam's worn clothes and the military bearing he couldn't quite shake. "You one of them soldier boys?" "Was," Sam replied simply. "Blue or gray? Does it matter?" Murphy shrugged. "Not to me. Dead is dead, I reckon. But some folks around here, they still carry grudges." Sam nodded and turned to leave, but Murphy's voice stopped him. "There's the widow Morrison, got a small spread east of town. Mike could use help with repairs, though I doubt she can pay much." The widow. Every frontier town had at least one woman left to fend for themselves in a land that barely tolerated men. Sam touched the brim of his hat in thanks and headed back to his horse. The Morrison place sat 3 miles from town, a modest collection of buildings that showed signs of recent neglect. The main house needed paint, the barn door hung crooked, and several fence posts had given up their fight against gravity. But there were chickens pecking in the yard and smoke rising from the chimney, signs of life, of someone still trying. Sam dismounted at the gate, knowing better than to ride up unannounced. He'd barely taken 2 steps when the front door opened and a woman emerged, a shotgun cradled in her arms with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. "That's far enough," she said. Her voice carried the weariness that matched the lines around her eyes, though she couldn't have been more than 25. "State your business." "Sam Hawthorne. Ma'am, Murphy at the store said you might need help with repairs." She studied him, taking in the military set of his shoulders, the way his hand stayed carefully away from the army colt on his hip. Her dress had been mended multiple times, but it was clean, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that couldn't quite hide its natural curl. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Food and a place in the barn is all I can offer." "That's fair." A child's cough from inside the house made her turn sharply. When she looked back, her face had hardened with the fierce protectiveness of a mother. "My son's poorly. He needs quiet. You cause any trouble, you'll answer to this." She lifted the shotgun slightly. "No trouble, ma'am, just work." She lowered the weapon slowly. "Grace Morrison," she said. "My husband died in the mines last year. Sorry for your loss." Grace's laugh was bitter. "Aren't we all?" She gestured toward the barn. "There's hay in the loft. Supper's at sunset. You miss it. You go hungry." Sam led his horse to the barn, unsaddled the animal, and surveyed his temporary home. It was cleaner than many places he'd slept, and through the gaps in the boards, he could see the house where lamplight was beginning to glow against the approaching dusk. Inside that house, Grace Morrison ladled thin soup into bowls while her son, Thomas, sat wrapped in a quilt by the stove. The boy was 6, with his mother's dark hair and his late father's stubborn chin. The cough that racked his small body made her hands tighten on the ladle. "Mama, who was that man?" Thomas asked between coughs. "Someone to help with the work," she said carefully. "He'll sleep in the barn, like Papa used to do with the horses?" Grace's throat tightened. Something like that. She'd buried James Morrison with her own hands. The ground so hard she'd broken 2 shovel handles before the hole was deep enough. The other miners had helped at first, but they had their own families to feed, their own struggles to face. The banker, Mr. Hutchins, had made it clear that the mortgage wouldn't wait for grief to pass. 3 months behind now, with winter coming and no way to bring in the harvest alone, the neighbors whispered. Of course, a young widow, pretty despite the hardship, living alone with just a sickly child. Some of the women crossed the street rather than speak to her in town, as if widowhood might be contagious. The men were worse, with their lingering looks and unsubtle suggestions that she might ease her burdens in ways that would cost her far more than money. She'd managed this long by working from dawn to past dusk, by selling eggs when the hens cooperated, by taking in mending when her fingers weren't too numb from farm work. But Thomas needed medicine, needed a doctor, needed more than she could provide on her own. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Sam Hawthorne standing in the gathering darkness, hat in hand. "Didn't mean to disturb you, ma'am. Noticed the pump handle's broken. Fixed it, but thought you should know in case you wondered about the noise." Grace blinked in surprise. She'd been hauling water from the creek for 2 weeks, adding another burden to her endless list of chores. Thank you." He started to turn away, then paused. "That cough sounds like it's settling in his chest. My mother used to make a tea with honey and wild cherry bark. Might help some." "We don't have any honey," Grace said quietly, hating the admission of such a simple lack. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out a small jar. "Bought this in the last town. Never developed a taste for it myself." He set it on the doorstep and was gone before she could respond. Grace stood in the doorway, holding the precious jar, watching as the tall figure disappeared into the barn. For the first time in months, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps the possibility of it. Inside the barn, Sam spread his bedroll in the loft and lay back against the hay. Through the cracks in the wall, he could see the warm light of the house, could hear the faint sound of a woman singing to her sick child. It had been years since he'd heard a lullaby, years since he'd been anywhere that felt remotely like a home. He closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories crowded in, other voices, other songs, silenced by cannon fire and cavalry charges. He'd thought the territories would be far enough, that the ghosts couldn't follow him across the Mississippi. But they were patient, these shadows of the past, and they knew how to find a man in the quiet moments. Sam forced himself to focus on tomorrow's tasks. The fence posts needed setting, the barn door needed rehanging, the chicken coop had gaps large enough for foxes. Simple work, honest work, the kind that left a man too tired to think, too exhausted to remember. As the moon rose over the prairie, casting silver light across the endless grass, 2 damaged souls settled into their separate quarters. One sought healing for wounds that wouldn't close. The other fought to save the only good thing left in her world. Neither knew that fate had already begun weaving their stories together, that sometimes the greatest salvations came from the most unexpected sources. In the morning, there would be work and worry, struggle and sorrow. But tonight, for just a moment, there was quiet, broken only by a child's cough and a mother's gentle song, while a soldier tried to remember what it felt like to have something worth protecting. The storm rolled in from the mountains like an angry beast, turning the October evening into a chaos of wind and rain. Sam had spent the day setting fence posts, his shoulders aching from driving them deep into the stubborn earth. He'd just finished securing the horses when the first lightning split the sky, illuminating the Morrison homestead in stark, white flashes. He huddled in the barn's loft, rain hammering the roof like rifle fire, seeping through gaps in the boards. His bedroll was soaked within minutes, and the wind found every hole in the walls, turning the space into a cold, wet misery. Sam pulled his coat tighter, resigned to a long, uncomfortable night. He'd endured worse, nights in Tennessee mud, Virginia snow, places where staying still meant freezing to death. A particularly violent gust shook the entire structure, and somewhere above, boards groaned and splintered. A section of roof peeled back like paper, and suddenly the rain was pouring directly onto him. Sam scrambled to gather his few possessions, stuffing them into his saddlebags as water streamed down his face. Through the barn door, he could see the house, its windows glowing warmly against the storm. He'd slept in worse conditions, could make do, but then young Thomas's cough echoed across the yard, audible even above the thunder. The boy had been getting sicker. Sam had noticed. Grace tried to hide her worry, but he'd seen her watching her son with the fierce attention of a mother who knew something was wrong. Sam stood in the barn doorway, rain soaking through his clothes, pride warring with practicality. He'd made it this far without asking for charity, without imposing on anyone's hospitality. But his teeth were chattering now, and hypothermia was as much an enemy as any he'd faced in uniform. The decision was taken from him when the barn door flew open and Grace appeared, wrapped in an old military coat that must have been her husband's. She took one look at the destroyed roof, at Sam standing there like a drowned cat, and shook her head. "Don't be a fool," she called above the storm. "Get inside before you catch your death." "I'm fine, ma'am. Samuel Hawthorne, you get in this house right now. Or so help me. I'll drag you in myself." The use of his full name, spoken in that tone every mother masters, broke through his resistance. Sam grabbed his saddlebags and followed her across the yard, heads bent against the driving rain. The kitchen was blessedly warm, the stove radiating heat that made his numb fingers tingle painfully as feeling returned. Grace handed him a towel, averting her eyes as he dried his face and hair. "You can sleep by the stove," she said briskly. "I'll get some blankets. I don't want to impose." She turned on him then, eyes flashing. "Mr. Hawthorne, you've worked sunrise to sunset for 2 weeks, asking nothing but meals and that leaky barn for shelter. You've repaired half my farm and never complained once. Taking shelter from a storm isn't charity. It's common sense." From the small bedroom came another series of coughs, wet and painful sounding. Grace's expression shifted from annoyance to fear in an instant. She hurried to her son, leaving Sam dripping in the kitchen. He could hear her soothing voice, the boy's labored breathing. Without thinking, Sam moved to the doorway. Thomas lay propped on pillows, his face flushed with fever, each breath a struggle. Grace held a cup to his lips, trying to get him to drink, but the boy turned away, whimpering. "Burns," Thomas whispered. "I know, sweetheart, but you need fluids." Grace's voice was steady, but Sam could see her hands trembling. "May I?" Sam asked quietly. Grace looked up, surprised to find him there. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Sam knelt beside the bed, studying the boy. "You know what I used to do when medicine tasted bad?" he asked Thomas. The child's eyes focused on him with effort. "What?" "I'd pretend I was a soldier, and the medicine was magic water that would make me strong enough to fight dragons." Sam's voice was gentle, a tone Grace hadn't heard from him before. "Course, you have to take it in small sips. Let the magic work slowly." Thomas considered this. "Were you really a soldier?" "I was, and sometimes, when things were hard, we had to do things we didn't like to keep going." Sam held out his hand for the cup. "What do you say? Soldier, ready to fight those dragons?" To Grace's amazement, Thomas nodded and let Sam help him drink, taking small sips between coughs. When the cup was empty, the boy lay back, exhausted but calmer. "Tell me about the dragons," he whispered. Sam glanced at Grace, who nodded, tears standing in her eyes. He settled on the floor beside the bed, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. Well, there was this one dragon, lived in a mountain cave in Missouri. Biggest thing you ever saw, with scales like iron plates and breath hot enough to melt horseshoes. Grace watched from the doorway as Sam wove his tale, Thomas's eyes growing heavy as the story progressed. The storm raged outside, but here in this small circle of lamplight, there was peace. When the boy finally drifted off, his breathing still labored but more regular, Sam carefully stood and joined her in the kitchen. "Thank you," she whispered. "He's a fighter," Sam said. "Gets that from his mother, I expect." Grace busied herself at the stove, heating what was left of the evening's soup. His father used to tell him stories too, about finding gold, about building a grand house, about all the things we'd have someday. Her voice turned bitter. James was good at stories. She set a bowl before Sam, then sat across from him, the table between them like a careful boundary. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't speak ill of the dead. Death doesn't make saints of us," Sam said quietly. "Just makes us gone." They ate in silence for a while, the storm beginning to ease outside. Finally, Grace spoke again. "The war?" Sam nodded. "Cavalry, 3rd Virginia. My brother fought for the Union, died at Antietam." She met his eyes steadily. "Does that matter?" "Not to me. We all bled the same color." Grace studied him, this quiet man who'd appeared from nowhere, who worked without complaint and told stories to sick children. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. "What hurt you so deeply?" Sam's hand stilled on the spoon. For a long moment, he was silent, and Grace thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she had to lean forward to hear, he began to speak. "Had a farm in the Shenandoah Valley. Wife named Mary. Daughter called Elizabeth. She was 4, liked to chase chickens and pick wildflowers." His voice was steady, but Grace could see the cost of each word. "Went to war because I thought it was right. Thought I was protecting them. But war doesn't stay on battlefields. Sheridan's men came through in '64, burning everything. By the time I got leave to go home." He stopped, unable to continue. Grace reached across the table, her fingers barely touching his hand. "I'm sorry. I've been drifting ever since. 7 years now. Figured if I kept moving, maybe I could outrun it." He looked up at her. "But some things follow you no matter how far you go." "Yes," Grace said simply. "They do." The clock on the mantel chimed midnight. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves. Grace stood, gathering blankets from a chest. "We all need healing. Mr. Hawthorne, some wounds just take longer than others." She paused at her bedroom door. "That story about your soul needing healing, about Thomas needing saving. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe we found each other for a reason." After she closed her door, Sam made his bed by the stove, listening to Thomas's labored breathing from the next room. He thought about Grace's words, about the strange paths that had led him to this small farm in Wyoming territory. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urgent need to move on come morning, as sleep finally took him. Sam's last thought was of Mary's voice, gentle as summer rain. "Sometimes, Samuel, the good Lord puts us where we need to be, even when we don't know it ourselves." In the morning, he would rise early to repair the barn roof, to continue the endless work of keeping the farm running. Grace would tend her son, stretching their meager supplies, fighting to keep hope alive. But tonight, brought together by storm and circumstance, they had found something neither expected, the beginning of understanding. The first fragile threads of connection between two souls who had forgotten that healing was possible. The fire in the stove burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the stars emerged from behind the fleeing clouds, and the prairie stretched endlessly under their light. And in a small house on the edge of nowhere, 3 people slept. 1 dreaming of dragons, 2 dreaming, perhaps, of a future where the past no longer held them captive. The November sun cast long shadows across the farmyard as Sam split firewood behind the house. 3 weeks had passed since the storm. 3 weeks of shared meals and careful conversations, of small kindnesses and growing trust. He'd repaired the barn roof, reinforced the chicken coop, and started preparing the fields for spring planting. The work was hard but satisfying. Each completed task a small victory against the entropy that threatened all frontier homesteads. Thomas sat bundled in quilts on the porch, watching Sam work. The boy's health had improved slightly. The coughing fits came less frequently, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. Grace had fashioned a chair from old crates and cushions, creating a spot where her son could take in fresh air while staying warm. "Mr. Sam," Thomas called out. "Why do you split the wood that way?" Sam paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "What way is that?" "You turn it before you hit it. Papa used to just swing straight down." "Well," Sam said, setting another log on the stump, "sometimes the wood has a natural split line. If you read the grain right, takes half the effort." He demonstrated, the axe falling cleanly, the wood parting into perfect halves. "Can you teach me when I'm better?" "If your mother agrees, I'd be glad to." Grace emerged from the house, carrying a water bucket. She'd heard the exchange, and something warm bloomed in her chest at the easy way Sam spoke to her son, the patient way he answered endless questions. James had loved Thomas, but he'd been impatient with childhood curiosity, always focused on the next big strike, the fortune that waited just beyond reach. "Water," she announced, ladling out cups for both of them. Sam drank gratefully, noting how Grace's hands were red and chapped from washing, how her dress bore yet another patch at the elbow. She never complained, but he saw the weight she carried, the constant calculations of survival, how much flour remained, whether the eggs would sell in town, if the remaining chickens would last through winter. "Ryder coming," Thomas said suddenly, pointing toward the road. Sam instinctively moved closer to the porch, his hand drifting toward where his gun would be if he were wearing it. Old habits died hard. The rider was Reverend Collins from town, his black coat dusty from the journey. Grace stiffened, smoothing her apron. The Reverend only made house calls for births, deaths, or moral corrections. "Mrs. Morrison," the Reverend said, not dismounting. His eyes flicked to Sam, disapproval evident in his pinched expression. "I've come on behalf of the Ladies' Auxiliary." "Reverend," Grace said carefully. "There's been talk," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of communal judgment, "about your situation. A woman alone, taking in a drifter. It's unseemly." Sam stepped forward, but Grace's slight gesture stopped him. "Mr. Hawthorne works for room and board. Reverend, nothing unseemly about honest labor. Nevertheless, people talk for the sake of your reputation and your son's future in this community. The ladies suggest you reconsider this arrangement." "The ladies," Grace said, her voice steady but cold, "didn't offer help when my husband died. They didn't bring food when we were hungry or medicine when Thomas was sick. But they find time to ride out here and judge how I keep my family alive?" The Reverend's face reddened. "Mrs. Morrison, your tone, my tone, Reverend, is that of a woman who buried her husband with her own hands while the good Christians of Clearwater gossiped about how long was proper to mourn." "Good day to you," after the Reverend left, trailing indignation like dust. Grace sank onto the porch steps. Her hands shook as she covered her face. "He's not wrong," she said quietly. "People do talk. Maybe I should—" "Don't," Sam's voice was firm. "Don't let them shame you for surviving." That evening, after Thomas was asleep, they sat by the stove as had become their custom. Grace worked on mending while Sam cleaned and oiled tools. The comfortable silence between them had grown over weeks, but tonight it felt charged with unspoken things. "Tell me about her," Grace said suddenly. "You're Mary." Sam's hand stilled. He rarely spoke of his family, but Grace had shared her own pain stories of James's drinking, his wild schemes, the love that had turned to disappointment long before the mind took him. "She was—" Sam searched for words. Gentle, laughed at my poor jokes, could make a feast from nothing but cornmeal and hope. She had this way of humming while she worked, hymns mostly, said it made the work lighter. How did you meet? Church social. I was 19, full of vinegar and big plans. She was visiting her cousin, wore a blue dress with tiny flowers on it. His voice grew distant. I must have walked past her 10 times before I found courage to speak. She told me later she'd been waiting, wondering if I'd ever stop circling like a nervous colt. Grace smiled, despite the sadness of it. She sounds wonderful. She was. They both were. Lizzie had Mary's eyes, but my stubborn streak. Used to stamp her little foot when she was vexed. Looked just like her mother trying to be stern. The clock ticked on the mantel. Finally, Grace spoke again. Do you think they'd want you to keep running? Sam looked up sharply, but her eyes held only compassion. I think about that sometimes. Mary always said I was too quick to carry the world's weight. Said God gave us broad shoulders to help others, not to bear every burden alone. Wise woman. That she was. Grace set aside her mending, gathering courage for words she'd been holding back. These weeks, having you here, it's been different. Not just the help with work, though Lord knows I needed that. But Thomas, he's happier, he laughs again, and She paused, choosing carefully. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone to talk to at day's end. Grace, I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I know you have your ghosts, and I have mine, but maybe, just maybe, we could help each other carry them. Not as anything improper, just as two people who understand loss. Sam stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, fat flakes drifting lazily in the lamplight. I'm no good for anyone, he said roughly. I couldn't protect my own family. What makes you think, because you're here? Grace interrupted. Because you tell stories to a sick boy and leave honey on doorsteps. Because you work yourself to exhaustion fixing what's broken. Because despite everything, you still have kindness in you. The townspeople can hang themselves with their own tongues for all I care. The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. I've spent months tiptoeing around their judgment, trying to be the proper widow. But proper doesn't put food on the table or medicine in, my boy. You do more good in a day than their gossip does in a lifetime. Sam turned from the window, seeing her fierce determination, the strength that had kept her standing when everything tried to knock her down. You're remarkable, he said softly. You know that? Grace flushed, unused to compliments. I'm just trying to survive. No, Sam said, returning to his chair. You're doing more than that. You're building something. Every day, with every small act, you're proving that life goes on. That's something I forgot how to do. They sat quietly again, but the silence had changed, become something warm and alive with possibility. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the harsh landscape in temporary softness. Stay, Grace said finally. Not just for the winter. Stay and help me build something worth having. Thomas needs. I need. She stopped, then finished simply. We need you. Sam thought of the road that had brought him here. All the miles and empty towns. The running that never brought peace. He thought of Mary's voice in his dreams, telling him to stop punishing himself for being alive. He thought of Thomas's eager questions and Grace's quiet strength. All right, he said. I'll stay. Grace's smile was like sunrise after a long night. They didn't touch, didn't move from their separate chairs. But something fundamental had shifted. Two broken people had found in each other not completion, but companionship. Not an ending to grief, but someone to share its burden. Later, as Sam banked the fire for the night, he heard Grace's voice from her room, singing softly to Thomas. The melody was one Mary used to sing, and for the first time, it brought not pain but a bittersweet peace. Perhaps this was what healing looked like, not forgetting the past but finding room for a future alongside it. The snow continued through the night, covering the scars of summer drought and autumn storms. In the morning, They would face the town's gossip and winter's challenges. But tonight, in a small house on the edge of the prairie, hope had taken root. Two souls had chosen to stop running from their pain and instead face it together, finding in each other the strength to believe that broken things could still be beautiful. The Rocking J Ranch sprawled across 10,000 acres of Wyoming grassland, its buildings dark shapes against the December sky. Sam stood with a dozen other men outside the foreman's office, hat in hand, waiting for work assignments. The ranch needed extra hands for winter fence repairs and moving cattle to sheltered valleys before the worst storms hit. Hawthorne, the foreman, a weathered man named Briggs, called out, "You are cavalry, Murphy says?" "Yes, sir." "Can you handle rough stock?" "I can." "Good. You'll work with Martinez breaking horses. $1 a day. Grub at sunrise and sunset. Any man caught drinking or fighting draws his pay and rides out. Clear. Clear." The work was brutal. Wild horses brought down from the mountains kicked and bit, fought the rope with every ounce of strength. Sam's body, already lean from months of farm work, grew harder still. His hands bled, scabbed over, bled again. But each dollar earned was medicine for Thomas, flour for Grace's pantry, a payment against the mortgage that hung over the Morrison farm like a storm cloud. He wrote when he could, short letters that one of the Mexican vaqueros carried to town. "Grace, work goes well. Tell Thomas the horses here would make fine dragons for his stories. Money enclosed for medicine." "S." Her replies came back just as brief, but he treasured them. "Samuel. Thomas improving. Reverend visited again. I gave him an earful about Christian charity. Your friend, G. The other cowboys were a rough bunch. Former soldiers, drifters, men running from pasts they wouldn't discuss." Sam kept to himself mostly, but around the campfire at night, stories emerged. They recognized him as one of their own, a man marked by war and loss. "You got people?" Martinez asked one night, passing a flask that Sam declined. "Some." Sam replied carefully, "Lucky man, most of us got nothing but the next pay and the next town." 3 weeks into the job, trouble arrived in the form of Jake Coulter, a Kentucky man with Confederate sympathies that hadn't died at Appomattox. He'd been drinking in the bunkhouse, against ranch rules, and his tongue grew looser with each pull from his bottle. "Hawthorne," he slurred. "Heard tell you're sweet on that Morrison widow. Also heard you wore blue." Sam continued mending his chaps, not looking up. "War's over. Colder. Not for some of us. My brother died at Chancellorsville, maybe from one of your bullets." "Maybe. I'm sorry for your loss." "Sorry?" Coulter stood unsteadily. "Do you think sorry fixes anything?" The bunkhouse grew quiet. Everyone knew the signs of a fight brewing. "I think," Sam said calmly, "that we all lost enough in that war without adding to it now." "You yellow-bellied!" Coulter swung wildly. Sam moved without thinking, cavalry training taking over. He sidestepped, caught Coulter's arm, and had him on the ground before the man knew what happened. But instead of following up, Sam stepped back. "Sleep it off," he said. "Tomorrow we'll forget this happened." But Coulter couldn't forget. The next day, while Sam was in a corral with a particularly violent Mustang, Coulter opened the gate to the pen holding the already broken horses. They thundered through. Spooking the Mustang, Sam was working. The horse reared, came down hard, and Sam felt something give in his ribs as a hoof caught him. He hit the ground rolling, barely avoiding being trampled. By the time he struggled to his feet, Coulter was gone and Briggs was surveying the chaos of scattered horses. "What happened?" the foreman demanded. Sam could have told him, could have pointed fingers, but he'd learned long ago that justice and frontier law rarely rode together. "Gate must have come loose," he said through gritted teeth. Briggs wasn't fooled, but he respected Sam's choice. "Get yourself looked at, then get back to work." The camp doctor, a drunk who'd lost his license back east, confirmed 2 cracked ribs. "You're lucky," he said, wrapping Sam's torso tight. "Few inches lower and you'd be bleeding inside." Sam worked through the pain, every movement agony. At night, he lay in his bunk calculating another month of this work would earn enough to see Grace through winter, maybe pay down some of the mortgage. He could endure anything for a month. But 3 days later, another accident occurred. A cinch strap, clearly cut most of the way through, gave way while Sam was mounted. He managed to kick free before the saddle turned completely, but landed hard on his already injured ribs. This time, when he caught his breath, he found Martinez and several others standing over him. "We saw Coulter near your gear," Martinez said quietly. "This needs ending, amigo." That night, Coulter started another drunken tirade, this time about Mexican horse thieves. When he threw a punch at Martinez, Sam intervened. The fight was brief but vicious. Coulter pulled a knife. Sam disarmed him, but not before the blade opened a gash along his forearm. When Coulter hit the ground for the third time, he stayed down. Briggs appeared in the bunkhouse door. "Coulter, draw your pay and get out. Hawthorne, you too." "But he didn't," Martinez started. "I know what he didn't do," Briggs said. "But rules are rules. Fighting means you're done." He met Sam's eyes. "I'll make sure you get what you're owed, plus a little extra for the trouble. You're a good hand. Hawthorne, sorry to lose you." Sam packed his few belongings, his ribs screaming with each movement. The cut on his arm had been roughly bandaged but needed proper tending. He had maybe $20 saved. Not nearly enough, but it would have to do. The ride back to the Morrison farm took 2 days. Days of gritting his teeth against pain, of stopping frequently to rest. Snow began falling the second afternoon, and by the time he saw the farmhouse in the distance, he was swaying in the saddle. Grace was drawing water from the well when she saw him. The bucket fell from her hands as she ran toward him, catching his arm as he half fell from his horse. "Samuel, my God, what happened?" "Just a little trouble," he managed. "Nothing that won't heal." She helped him inside, her slight frame surprisingly strong. Thomas watched wide-eyed from his chair as Grace settled Sam near the stove. "Let me see," she demanded, already reaching for his coat. When she unwrapped the makeshift bandage on his arm, she hissed in sympathy. The cut was deep and angry-looking. His ribs, when she carefully examined them, were purple and swollen. "You fool," she said, but her hands were infinitely gentle. "You stubborn, brave fool." As she cleaned and properly bandaged his wounds, Sam told her about the ranch, about the money he'd earned, about Coulter and the fight. $20, he said, pulling the money from his coat. "I'm sorry it's not more." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Sorry? Samuel, you could have been killed. Money isn't worth—" She stopped, overwhelmed. "Hey," Thomas said from his chair. "Mister, Sam's back. Did you fight dragons?" "Something like that," Sam said, managing a smile for the boy. That night, Grace insisted Sam take the bed while she made a pallet on the floor. He protested weakly, but couldn't deny the relief of lying flat, of being warm and safe. Through the thin wall, he could hear her singing to Thomas, could hear her moving about the kitchen. Later, when the house was quiet, she appeared in the doorway. "Samuel, are you awake?" "Yes." She came closer, carrying a cup of willow bark tea. "For the pain," she said, helping him sit up to drink. In the lamplight, her face was soft with concern. "When I saw you riding in, hurt like that," she paused, searching for words. "I realized something. These months, having you here, it's changed things. Changed us. Thomas and I, we're not just surviving anymore. We're living, and that's because of you." "Grace." "No, let me finish. I don't know what's growing between us. Maybe it's too soon, maybe it's foolish, but I know I was terrified when I thought you might not come back." Sam reached out with his good arm, taking her hand. "I'll always come back," he said. "Long as you'll have me." She squeezed his fingers, then stood. "Rest now. Healing comes first. Everything else can wait." But as she turned to go, Sam caught her hand again. "Grace, that night you asked me to stay. I need you to know it wasn't just for the work or even for Thomas. It was for you too. You make me remember who I was before the war." You make me want to be that man again." She bent and kissed his forehead, a touch as light as snow. "You already are," she whispered. "You just don't see it yet." Alone in the dark, Sam lay still, feeling the pain in his body, but also something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove or blankets. He'd left the ranch with injuries and too little money, but somehow, impossibly, he felt like the richest man in Wyoming. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in clean white. Tomorrow would bring challenges: the mortgage, Thomas's medicine, the endless work of survival. But tonight, Sam Hawthorne was home, and that was worth more than all the wages he'd lost. The sound of approaching horses broke the morning stillness. Sam looked up from repairing the chicken coop to see 3 riders coming down the road. Edward Hutchins from the bank, flanked by 2 men Sam didn't recognize. Hard men, by the look of them, with low-slung guns and eyes that measured everything like wolves studying sheep. Grace emerged from the house, wiping flour from her hands. Her face paled when she recognized the banker, but she stood straight, chin lifted. Sam moved closer, positioning himself between her and the visitors. "Mrs. Morrison," Hutchins said without dismounting. He was a thin man with the complexion of someone who spent his days counting other people's money. "I believe you know why I'm here. The mortgage isn't due for 2 more weeks," Grace said steadily. "Actually, if you read the terms carefully, payment in full can be called in at the bank's discretion if payments fall behind. You're 4 months behind, ma'am. That gives me the right to demand full payment of the remaining balance." "How much?" Sam asked quietly. Hutchins' eyes flicked to him dismissively. "This doesn't concern you, drifter, unless Mrs. Morrison has taken a new husband?" His tone made the question an insult. "How much?" Sam repeated. $240. "Due in 7 days, or I'll be forced to foreclose." Grace's knees nearly buckled. $240 might as well have been $2,000. "Mr. Hutchins, please, if you could give us until spring—" "The bank isn't a charity, Mrs. Morrison. 7 days." He touched his hat mockingly and turned his horse. One of the hard men lingered, studying Sam with professional interest. "Seen you before," he said. "That trouble up at the Rocking J? You handle yourself pretty well for a farmhand. Just trying to make an honest living," Sam replied evenly. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Aren't we all?" He spurred his horse and followed the others. Grace sank onto the porch steps, her face in her hands. $200. We don't have 20. Thomas appeared in the doorway, thin face anxious. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Go back inside where it's warm." But the boy had heard enough. "Are they going to take our house?" Grace pulled him close. "No, baby, we'll figure something out." Sam knelt beside them. "We'll find a way," he said firmly. "I promise." That night, after Thomas was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, trying to find hope in arithmetic. The numbers didn't lie. Even if they sold everything except the house itself, they'd barely raise $50. "I could go to my sister in Missouri," Grace said dully. "She married well. Maybe she'd take us in. You'd lose the farm. Better than losing everything." But her voice broke on the words. This farm was all she had left of James, all Thomas had ever known. Starting over as a charity case in her sister's home would kill something vital in her. Sam stood abruptly. "I'll go back to town tomorrow. Maybe someone needs work done." "Samuel, you're still healing. Your ribs—" "Are fine," he lied. "Don't give up yet." In town the next day, Sam tried every establishment. The general store didn't need help. The saloon had all the muscle it required. The livery was barely staying afloat itself. As the sun peaked, he found himself outside the Last Dollar Saloon, where a crowd had gathered. $20 says no one stays on that devil for 30 seconds, a voice called out. Sam pushed through to see a massive black stallion in a makeshift corral, sides heaving, eyes rolling white. A cowboy was picking himself up from the dirt, spitting blood. "Devil's right," the cowboy muttered. "Things not natural." The horse's owner, a well-dressed man named Garrison, stood by the fence. $20 to anyone who can ride him. 50 if you can break him to saddle proper. "What's wrong with him?" Sam asked. Garrison shrugged. "Got him from a Mexican trader. Said he was cursed. All I know is 6 men have tried and 6 men have failed. I'm starting to think he was right about the curse." Sam studied the horse. There was intelligence in those wild eyes. And pain, too. $50 if I break him? "That's right. But if he kills you, I'm not paying for the funeral." Word spread quickly. By the time Sam entered the corral, half the town had gathered. He saw Hutchins in the crowd, smirking, probably hoping to see the interfering drifter get trampled. The stallion watched Sam approach, muscles bunched, ready to explode, but Sam didn't move like the others had. No aggression, no dominance. He stood in the center of the corral and waited. "What's he doing?" someone called out. "Having a staring contest?" The horse snorted, pawed the ground. Sam remained still, his voice low and steady. "I know," he said, pitched only for the horse's ears. "Someone hurt you, made you mean because they were mean first. But that's over now." For 20 minutes, man and horse regarded each other. The crowd grew restless. But Sam didn't move except to shift his weight when his ribs protested. Finally, the stallion took a step forward, then another. When the horse was close enough, Sam slowly extended his hand. The stallion sniffed, then jerked back, but he didn't retreat to the far side of the corral. "That's it," Sam murmured. "Take your time." It took another hour. The crowd thinned, bored by the lack of action. But when Sam finally touched the horse's neck, those who remained murmured in amazement. By sunset, he had a rope on the stallion, not forcing, just suggesting. The horse followed him around the corral, still wary but no longer murderous. "I'll be damned," Garrison said. "Never seen anything like it." "He's not broken," Sam said. "Probably never will be. Not the way you mean. But he'll work with someone he trusts. $50? Garrison hesitated, then nodded. "You earned it. Hell, take the horse too. I'll never be able to sell him anyway." Sam's ribs screamed as he led the stallion to the livery. But $50 was a quarter of what they needed. It was a start. Over the next 3 days, word of Sam's feat spread. Ranchers brought problem horses, offering $5 or $10 if he could settle them enough to work. Sam took every job, working from dawn to dusk despite the pain that never quite left his body. Grace protested each morning as he saddled up, but she knew they had no choice. She sold eggs in town, took in mending, did laundry for the hotel. Thomas helped by gathering kindling to sell, though his cough had worsened with the cold. By the 6th day, they had scraped together $170, 70 short. Tomorrow, Hutchins would come to claim the farm. That night, Grace was inconsolable. "We tried," she whispered. "God knows we tried. It's not over," Sam said. But even he heard the hollow ring in his words. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sam opened it to find the hard-eyed man who'd ridden with Hutchins, standing in the freezing dark. "Evening," the man said. "Name's Crawford." "Mind if I come in?" Sam's hand moved to his gun. "State your business." "Easy, friend. I'm here to talk business, but not the kind you think." He held up his hands. 5 minutes, that's all I ask." Against his better judgment, Sam let him in. Crawford took in the modest home, the sick child, the desperate woman. Something flickered in his eyes, maybe conscience, maybe just calculation. "I'll get to the point," Crawford said. "Hutchins hired me and my partner to make sure this foreclosure goes smooth tomorrow. But I've been asking around town about you folks. Seems you're decent people in a hard spot." "What's your point?" Grace asked coldly. "My point is, I've done things I'm not proud of for money. But putting a sick kid out in winter?" He shook his head. "That's a line I won't cross, so I'm here to make you an offer." He pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coins. "There's $100 here. My pay for this job, plus some I've saved. It's yours if you want it." Sam and Grace exchanged shocked looks. Why? Sam asked. Crawford shrugged. Maybe because I had a mother once, trying to raise me alone. Maybe because I'm tired of being the kind of man who makes widows cry. Or maybe I just don't like Hutchins's smug face. Take your pick. We can't, Grace began. You can, and you will. Crawford said firmly. Consider it a loan if that helps your pride. Pay me back someday if you're able. Don't if you can't. Either way, that boy keeps his home. He set the pouch on the table and moved to leave. At the door, he turned back to Sam. That thing with the horse yesterday? That was something. Man who can gentle a mad animal like that. He's got something special. Don't let Hutchins or anyone else take that from you. After he left, Grace counted the money with shaking hands. Combined with what they'd saved, they had enough. More than enough. She broke down crying, tears of relief, of gratitude, of exhaustion. Sam held her as she wept, Thomas clinging to them both. They'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, they'd done it. We need to get to the bank first thing, Sam said. Pay this off before Hutchins can cause more trouble. Grace nodded, wiping her eyes. Together. That night, as snow began falling again, Sam stood on the porch looking out at the land they'd fought to save. The stallion, which Thomas had named Midnight, nickered softly from the barn. Inside, Grace sang as she prepared for bed. A sound of joy he hadn't heard from her before. They'd won this battle, but Sam knew the war wasn't over. Men like Hutchins didn't give up easily. There would be other challenges, other fights. But for tonight, they were safe. They were home. And sometimes, in a hard world, that was victory enough. The February blizzard struck without warning, turning the world into a howling white void. Sam had just finished securing the animals when he heard Grace's desperate cry from the house. He fought through the wind to find her holding Thomas, the boy's face flushed with fever, his breathing shallow and labored. He collapsed, Grace said, her voice tight with fear. He was playing by the stove and just fell. Sam touched the boy's forehead and pulled back at the heat. Thomas's eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and his small body shook with chills despite the burning fever. We need the doctor, Grace said. Now. Sam looked outside where the storm had already piled snow against the door. The 10 miles to town might as well have been 1,000, but the alternative was watching Thomas slip away before their eyes. I'll saddle Midnight, he said. In this storm, Samuel, we can't wait it out. Bundle him up. We're all going. Grace didn't argue, while she wrapped Thomas in every blanket they owned. Sam fought his way to the barn. Midnight stamped nervously, sensing the storm's violence. Sam saddled him quickly, then rigged a travois from fence poles and canvas. It would be more stable than trying to carry Thomas on horseback. When he returned to the house, Grace had Thomas ready, the boy barely conscious, mumbling incoherently about dragons and soldiers. They secured him to the travois, Grace climbing up behind him to hold him steady while Sam took Midnight's reins. The moment they left the shelter of the buildings, the storm attacked with primal fury. Wind-driven snow stung like needles. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Sam pulled his hat low and trusted Midnight's instincts, the black stallion pushing forward despite the drifts that reached his chest. They'd gone perhaps a mile when Thomas began convulsing. Grace screamed, trying to hold him still while the travois bucked and swayed. Sam stopped, helping her cushion the boy's head until the seizure passed, leaving him limp and barely breathing. He's dying, Grace sobbed. My baby's dying. No, Sam said fiercely. Not today. Not while I draw breath. He pulled off his coat, wrapping it around Thomas for extra warmth, ignoring the cold that immediately bit through his shirt. They pushed on. The road disappeared entirely. Everything white and terrible and endless. Sam navigated by memory and prayer, knowing that one wrong turn would send them into ravines or open prairie where they'd wander until frozen. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in the white fury. Sam's hands went numb on the reins. Ice formed in his beard, on his eyelashes, behind him. Grace had gone quiet. all her energy focused on shielding Thomas with her body. Then Midnight stumbled, going to his knees in a hidden drift. The travoy tilted dangerously. Sam hauled on the reins, muscles screaming, and got the stallion back up. But when he looked back, his heart nearly stopped. The travoy had torn loose on one side, and Grace was struggling to keep Thomas from sliding into the snow. Sam plunged back to them, waist deep in the drift. Together they lifted Thomas, and Sam saw with growing dread that the boy's lips were blue, his breathing barely visible. "We have to warm him," Grace said desperately. Sam made a decision. There was an old line shack about a mile north, used by cowboys during roundup. If they could find it. "Hold on," he told Grace. "Just a little farther." He lifted Thomas in his arms, the boy weighing almost nothing, and began breaking trail on foot while Grace led Midnight. Each step was agony. The snow like concrete, the wind a living thing trying to tear them apart. Just when Sam thought he couldn't take another step, a dark shape loomed through the white, the line shack, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. But it was shelter. Sam kicked the door open and they stumbled inside. The single room was freezing, but at least the wind couldn't reach them. An old pot-bellied stove sat in the corner with, miracle of miracles, a small stack of wood beside it. While Grace held Thomas, Sam's numb fingers fumbled with matches. 3 broke before he managed to light one. The kindling caught, and soon blessed heat began radiating from the stove. They made a pallet near the heat, piling every blanket and coat on Thomas. The boy's fever had broken, but left him weak as a newborn kitten, his breathing still frighteningly shallow. "We need to get his temperature up slowly," Grace said, her nurse's training from helping neighbors taking over. Too fast could stop his heart. They worked together, rubbing Thomas's limbs to restore circulation, spooning warm water between his lips. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside their small shelter, they fought their own battle against death. Hours passed. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing them, sometimes calling for his father or talking to invisible companions. During one lucid moment, he gripped Sam's hand. "Don't let the dragons get Mama," he whispered. "Never," Sam promised. "I'll fight every dragon in the world to keep you both safe." Grace looked at Sam across Thomas's small form, tears streaming down her face. "I can't lose him," she said. "He's all I have left of—" She stopped, shaking her head. "No, that's not true anymore. Is it? Grace, if we get through this," she said, "I want you to know, I love you, Samuel Hawthorne, not because you're helping us, not because I need you, but because of who you are. The man who gentles wild horses and tells stories to sick boys and risks his life without hesitation for people who aren't even his blood." Sam reached across to take her hand. "They are my blood," he said simply. "You both are. Have been since that first night you took me in. I love you too, Grace. You and Thomas both." As if responding to their words, Thomas stirred, his breathing deepening. Color began returning to his cheeks. Grace felt his forehead still warm, but no longer burning. "The fever's breaking properly now," she said, hardly daring to hope. They maintained their vigil through the night. The storm began to weaken near dawn, and by full daylight, they could see town buildings in the distance. Sam lifted Thomas, who was conscious now though weak, and they made the final push. "Doctor." Hartwell took one look at them. Sam carrying Thomas, Grace supporting Sam, who was swaying on his feet, and immediately took charge. While he examined Thomas, his wife forced hot soup into Sam and Grace, tisking over their frost-nipped fingers in exhaustion. "The boy's lucky," Hartwell finally pronounced. "Pneumonia, but you caught it in time. The crisis has passed. Few days of rest and proper medicine, he should recover fully." Grace nearly collapsed with relief. Sam caught her, holding her as she wept against his chest. They'd done it. Somehow, through storm and terror, they'd saved him. Hutchins appeared while they were still at the doctor's, his face sour. "Heard about your heroics," he said to Sam. "Don't think this changes anything. You paid the mortgage, but there'll be other debts. Your kind always falls behind eventually." My kind. Sam's voice was dangerously quiet. Drifters, opportunists, men who prey on desperate widows. Sam took a step forward, but Grace's hand on his arm stopped him. Mr. Hutchins, she said calmly. This man just risked his life to save my son. He's worth a dozen of you, and if you ever speak ill of him again, you'll answer to me. Hutchins retreated, muttering about improper women and their choices. Grace turned to Sam, chin high. Let them talk, she said. I don't care anymore. I know what's true. They stayed in town 3 days while Thomas grew stronger. Word of their journey through the blizzard spread, and people's attitudes began shifting. The baker's wife brought fresh bread, saying anyone who'd braved that storm for a child was good people in her book. The blacksmith offered Sam work whenever he needed it. Even Reverend Collins seemed subdued, merely nodding when they passed. Crawford appeared the last day, pressing a small carved horse into Thomas's hands. For a brave boy, he said gruffly. Then to Sam, you ever need backup, you let me know. Some things are worth fighting for. The ride home was slow but peaceful. Thomas bundled between them on midnight, chattering about his adventures and the dragon storm they'd defeated. The familiar buildings of their farm appeared like a benediction, welcoming them home. That night, after Thomas was safely asleep in his own bed, Grace and Sam sat by the stove as they had so many times before, but now there were no barriers between them, no careful distances maintained. What happens now? Grace asked softly. Sam took her hand, marveling at how right it felt in his. Now we live, he said. We build something good here. Together. Together, she agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of hope and home and healing. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under stars bright as diamonds. The winter was far from over, and there would be more challenges ahead. But inside the small house, a family had been forged in the crucible of crisis, not bound by blood or law yet, but by something stronger, the choice to stand together against whatever storms might come. The spring thaw brought new life to the prairie and new hope to the Morrison farm. Thomas had recovered remarkably, his laughter once again filling the house, though Grace still watched him with the anxious eyes of a mother who'd nearly lost everything. The boy had grown during his illness, his face losing some of its baby roundness, his questions becoming deeper. Mr. Sam, he asked one morning while helping feed the chickens. Are you going to marry Mama? Sam nearly dropped the feed bucket. Across the yard, Grace had stopped hanging laundry, pretending not to listen. That's something your Mama and I need to discuss, Sam said carefully. Papa's been gone a long time. Thomas said matter-of-factly, and you make Mama smile. She sings now, like she used to before Papa died. That evening, after Thomas was in bed, Sam found Grace on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky crimson and gold. He sat beside her, gathering courage for words that had been building since the blizzard. Thomas asked me something today, he began. I heard, Grace said softly. Children see things clear, don't they? Sometimes clearer than adults. Sam took her hand. Grace, I know it might seem too soon, and folks will talk, but yes, she said simply. Sam blinked. Yes. She turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Hawthorne, if that's what you're trying to ask. But people will say that I'm a shameless widow who couldn't wait a proper mourning period? Grace's voice held steel. Let them. They weren't there when Thomas was sick. They didn't help when we were hungry. You did. You've been more of a father to Thomas these past months than James ever was. Truth be told. Sam pulled her close, feeling the last walls around his heart crumble. I want to do this right, he said. Give you a proper wedding, not some rushed affair. I don't need fancy, Grace murmured against his chest. I just need you. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The guest list was Small Doctor, Hartwell and his wife, the blacksmith's family, Crawford, who stood as Sam's witness, and, surprisingly, Martinez and several cowboys from the Rocking J who'd heard about the wedding and rode down to celebrate. Reverend Collins performed the ceremony with obvious reluctance, but even he couldn't deny the joy radiating from the small family. Thomas stood between them, holding the rings, beaming as if he'd orchestrated the whole thing himself. "Do you, Samuel, take this woman?" Collins began the traditional vows. "I do," Sam said firmly, not waiting for the rest. "I take Grace and Thomas both, as my family, to protect and cherish, in sickness and health, through blizzards and droughts and whatever else this life throws at us." Grace laughed through her tears. "I do too," she said. "All of that, forever." When they kissed, Thomas cheered, and even Collins smiled despite himself. The small reception in their yard was lively. Martinez had brought his guitar, and soon music filled the air. Cowboys who'd known only trail songs and bawdy tunes found themselves humming along to hymns and folk melodies. Crawford, looking uncomfortable in his best shirt, shook Sam's hand roughly. "You got yourself a good woman," he said, "and she got herself a good man. Don't let anyone tell you different." But even in the midst of joy, shadows lingered. Hutchins had been suspiciously quiet since the mortgage payment, and Sam had learned that rattlesnakes were most dangerous when silent. The answer came a month later. Sam had taken a contract breaking horses for a ranch outside town. Good money that would set them up for the coming year. He was working a particularly spirited mare when Sheriff Watson rode up, his face grim. "Sam Hawthorne?" the sheriff asked formally. "You know who I am. Bill? I'm here official-like. There's been a complaint filed. Theft of a horse?" Sam straightened slowly. "What horse?" "Black Stallion. Man says you took it from him down in Cheyenne. Has a bill of sale and everything." Sam's blood ran cold. Midnight, the horse Garrison had given him. "That's a lie. Garrison gave me that horse fair and square. Half the town saw it." "Well, this fellow calls himself Prescott. Says different. Says Garrison had no right to give away stolen property." Watson looked genuinely troubled. "I'm sorry, Sam, but I need you to come in until we sort this out." Sam knew then what had happened. Hutchins had found another way to strike at them, probably paying someone to make false claims. In a frontier town. Horse theft was serious, hanging serious. "Let me tell my wife," Sam said quietly. "Make it quick." Grace went white when he told her, Thomas clinging to her skirts with wide, frightened eyes. "This is Hutchins," she said immediately. "He's behind this. I know, but I have to go in, face this proper. You wire Garrison in Cheyenne. Get him to confirm his story." "Samuel," her voice broke. He pulled her close, including Thomas in the embrace. "Remember what I promised. I'll fight every dragon. This is just another one." The jail cell was small and dark, reminiscent of too many places Sam had tried to forget. Through the barred window, he could see citizens gathering, whispering, horse theft. The drifter finally showed his true colors. That poor widow, taken in by a criminal. Crawford appeared at the bars near midnight. "This stinks worse than a dead buffalo in August," he said. "That Prescott fellow? He's staying at the hotel. Expenses paid by guess who. Can you prove it?" "Working on it. But Sam, you need to know, they're pushing for a quick trial. Judge is one of Hutchins' poker buddies." The trial was set for 3 days hence. Grace worked tirelessly, sending wires, gathering witnesses, but Garrison couldn't be reached. Turned out he'd left for California the week before. Without his testimony, it was Sam's word against Prescott's papers. The courtroom was packed. Hutchins sat in the front row, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Prescott, a weaselly man with shifting eyes, told his tale of the stolen stallion with practiced ease. His forged papers looked authentic enough. When Sam took the stand, the prosecutor, another of Hutchins' associates, tore into him. "Isn't it true you're a drifter, Mr. Hawthorne? No family, no roots." "I have family," Sam said firmly. "A wife and son. A widow you married rather conveniently. Some might say, tell me, how does a man with no money suddenly afford to pay off a mortgage?" The implication was clear horse thief, opportunist, fortune hunter. Sam saw some in the crowd nodding, ready to believe the worst. Then Thomas's voice rang out clear. "He's not a thief. He saved me. He's my papa now, and you can't take him." The judge banged his gavel, but Grace was already standing. "Your Honor, I have something to say." "Sit down, Mrs. Hawthorne. You're out of order." "No," Grace said, her voice carrying the same steel Sam had heard the day she faced down the Reverend. "I've been silent too long. This town has whispered about me, judged me, condemned me for trying to survive. And now you want to take the best man I've ever known based on lies?" She pulled out a telegram. "This came an hour ago. From Fort Laramie. Garrison's regiment confirms he gave Samuel that horse. The real thief was caught last month trying to sell the horse's mate." The courtroom erupted. The prosecutor spluttered. Prescott began edging toward the door, but found Crawford blocking his path. "Furthermore," Grace continued, "I have here a signed statement from Mr. Crawford detailing payments made by Mr. Hutchins to various individuals, including Mr. Prescott, for the purpose of destroying my family." Hutchins shot to his feet. "That's slander. I'll sue." "You'll do nothing," a new voice said from the back. Everyone turned to see Marshal Douglas from the territorial court. "Had a wire about irregularities in this trial. Seems I arrived just in time." The federal marshal's presence changed everything. Prescott broke quickly, admitting the fraud. Hutchins blustered and threatened. But when Crawford produced bank drafts showing the payments, his house of cards collapsed. "Samuel Hawthorne," the judge said reluctantly, "charges are dismissed. You're free to go." But Marshal Douglas wasn't finished. "Mr. Hutchins, you'll be coming with me. Conspiracy, fraud, attempted theft by deception. The territorial court will want words with you." As Hutchins was led away, still protesting, Sam walked free into Grace's arms. Thomas wrapped himself around Sam's legs, crying with relief. "Papa's staying?" he kept asking. "The bad men can't take him." "I'm staying," Sam assured him, lifting the boy onto his shoulders. "Nothing's taking me from you and your mama. Nothing ever." The crowd that had gathered to see a hanging dispersed slowly. Some shamefaced, others offering quiet congratulations. The town's attitude had shifted decisively. The Morrison family, now the Hawthorne family, had proven their mettle. Crawford lingered, refusing Sam's attempts to thank him. "Just paying a debt," he said. "Man's got to live with himself. Besides," he added with a rare smile, "someone's got to keep you folks out of trouble." That night, as they sat around their kitchen table, their family table, Thomas between them working on his letters, Grace reached over to take Sam's hand. "No more dragons?" she asked softly. Sam thought about the past, about the long road that had brought him here, about the ghosts that no longer haunted his dreams. "There'll always be dragons," he said, "but now we face them together." "Together," Thomas repeated, not looking up from his careful penmanship. "That spelled Tojuher, like family." "Just like family," Sam agreed, and knew with bone-deep certainty that he was finally, truly home. Outside, midnight whinnied from the barn, and the spring evening settled peaceful over the Morrison, no, the Hawthorne, farm. They'd fought for this peace, earned it with pain and courage and love, and now, at last, they could simply live it. The summer of 1883 arrived with golden promise. The wheat stood tall in fields that Sam had expanded with the help of neighboring farmers who now called him friend. Thomas, stronger with each passing day, raced through the rows playing soldier, his laughter carrying on the warm breeze. At 8 years old, he'd grown sturdy and bright, the shadow of illness now just a memory. Grace stood in the doorway of their home, no longer just a struggling widow's house, but a thriving farmstead, watching her son and husband work together in the vegetable garden. Her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, the secret she'd share with Sam tonight, after believing she'd never have another child. This miracle felt like God's final blessing on their hard-won happiness. "Mama, look," Thomas called, holding up a massive tomato. "Papa says we can sell these at market." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she called back, her heart full at how naturally Thomas had taken to calling Sam Papa. The transformation of their farm reflected the transformation of their lives. The barn stood straight and proud with fresh paint. New fences stretched across expanded pastures where a small herd of cattle grazed alongside Midnight and 3 mares Sam was training. The mortgage was not just current but nearly paid off, thanks to Sam's growing reputation as the territory's best horse gentler. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Sam noticed Grace's special glow. "You look particularly beautiful tonight," he said, causing her to blush like a schoolgirl. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Thomas is going to be a big brother." Sam's eyes widened, joy and wonder flooding his face. "Truly. Doc Hartwell confirmed it today. Christmas time, he thinks." Thomas looked between them, understanding dawning. "A baby, a real baby, a real baby," Grace confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Sam pulled them both into his embrace, his own eyes suspiciously moist. "Another miracle," he whispered. "Our family grows." That night, after Thomas had gone to bed full of plans for teaching his sibling about horses and dragons, Sam and Grace sat on their porch watching fireflies dance in the dusk. "Are you happy?" Grace asked softly. "Truly happy. This life is so different from what you knew before." Sam considered the question, thinking of the long road that had brought him here. "I spent years believing I didn't deserve happiness, that I was meant to wander alone as penance for surviving when my first family didn't. But you and Thomas taught me something." "What's that?" "That love isn't finite, that the heart expands, that honoring the dead doesn't mean joining them." He touched her belly gently. "Mary would have wanted this for me. She would have loved you for saving me." Grace leaned into him. "And James, for all his faults, would be glad Thomas has a real father now, someone who teaches him strength and gentleness in equal measure." The summer passed in a blur of hard work and quiet joy. The harvest was the best anyone could remember, and Sam's reputation brought customers from 3 territories. Thomas helped with simpler tasks, proud to contribute, while Grace managed the house and prepared for the baby despite Sam's insistence she rest more. Crawford had become a regular visitor, usually appearing around supper time with mysterious frequency. He'd left Hutchins' employee Hutchins himself, now serving time in territorial prison, and started his own freight business. Thomas adored him, and Uncle Ford seemed to return the affection, though he'd gruffly deny any softness. One evening in early September, Crawford arrived with news that set the whole town buzzing. "Railroad's coming through," he announced. "Surveyor says the line will pass just north of Clearwater. This place is about to boom again." "Good for business," Sam mused. "More people means more need for horses, produce, and freight hauling," Crawford added with a grin. "Already got contracts lined up. Might even need a partner, if you're interested." Sam shook his head. "I'm a farmer now, Ford, but I appreciate the offer." "Farmer and the best horseman in the territory," Crawford corrected. "Don't sell yourself short." Dr. Hartwell visited regularly, monitoring Grace's pregnancy. "Everything looks fine," he assured them after one checkup. "This baby's strong, like its parents, like its whole family," Thomas corrected, making the adults smile. The first snow came early that year, but the Hawthorne farm was ready. The barn was stocked with feed, the root cellar full of preserves Grace had put up with help from neighboring women who now called her friend. The house was warm and tight against the wind, with enough wood split to last 2 winters. On a cold December night, Grace's labor began. Sam sent Thomas to fetch Doc Hartwell while he stayed with Grace, holding her hand and trying not to show his terror. The memories of loss tried to resurface, but Grace's strength anchored him to the present. "Don't you dare look scared, Samuel Hawthorne," she said between contractions. "We've faced worse than this." "You're right," he said, kissing her forehead. "You're the strongest woman I know." The labor was long but uncomplicated. As dawn broke over the snow-covered prairie, the cry of a newborn filled the house. Doc Hartwell placed the baby in Grace's arms with a smile. "Congratulations," You have a healthy daughter. A daughter. Sam stared at the tiny, perfect face, overwhelmed by emotions he'd thought buried forever. When Grace placed the baby in his arms, he wept openly, unashamed. "What should we name her?" Grace asked softly. Sam thought of the past and the future, of loss and redemption, of the journey that had brought them all together. "Hope," he said finally. "Hope, Elizabeth Hawthorne." Thomas, who'd been waiting anxiously in the kitchen with Crawford, burst in at the news. "A sister. I have a sister." He approached carefully, eyes wide with wonder. "She's so small." "You'll have to protect her," Sam said solemnly. "Be the best big brother you can be." "I will," Thomas promised with the seriousness only an 8-year-old could muster. "I'll teach her everything, about horses and reading and how Papa saved us in the blizzard and how Mama is the bravest person in the world." As the sun climbed higher, bathing the snow in golden light, the Hawthorne family settled into their new configuration. Crawford had mysteriously produced a wooden cradle, claiming he'd just found it lying around. Neighbors would arrive throughout the day with food and congratulations, the community embracing them fully at last. Sam stood by the window, watching the land he now called home behind him. Grace hummed softly to Baby Hope while Thomas read aloud from his primer, practicing for when he could read to his sister. The ghosts of the past were still there, would always be there, but they no longer haunted. Instead, they seemed to smile, to approve, to rest easy knowing he'd found his way home. One needed his soul healed. Grace had said that first night. One needed her son saved. Now, Sam thought, they'd all been saved. By courage, by perseverance, but most of all by love. The love that had grown from desperate necessity into something beautiful and lasting. The farm that had once stood on the edge of ruin now thrived. The family that had been broken by loss was now whole again. Different but complete. As another prairie winter settled over Wyoming territory, the Hawthorne farm stood strong against the elements. Inside, warmed by more than just the stove, a soldier-turned-farmer held his daughter while his wife and son prepared the evening meal. It was a simple scene, repeated in countless homes across the frontier, but for Sam Hawthorne, who'd traveled so far through darkness to find this light, it was nothing short of miraculous. The dragons had all been slain, the battles were won, and in their place stood something far more powerful than any weapon or enemy. A family forged in hardship, tested by trials, and bound by the unbreakable bonds of chosen love. The wandering was over. The healing was complete. Sam Hawthorne had finally, truly, come home. In the years to come, the railroad would bring prosperity to Clearwater. The Hawthorne farm would grow, and with it, their family. Thomas would become a doctor, inspired by Doc Hartwell. Hope would inherit her father's gift with horses and her mother's indomitable spirit. And Sam and Grace would grow old together, their love deepening with each passing season. Proof that sometimes the greatest adventures led not to far horizons but to the hearth of home. But that's a story for another day. For now, on this winter evening in 1883, it was enough that they were together, whole and happy. The rest, as they say in the West, would take care of itself. Thank you for listening to our story. If you're enjoying this Wild West tale of love, redemption, and family, we'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let us know where in the world you're listening from. It's always amazing to connect with fellow story lovers across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more heartwarming historical stories. And share your thoughts on Sam and Grace's journey. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to bring you more tales from the American frontier.